Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you unforgettable tales that challenge, inspire, and change the way we see the world. Today's story is about an unexpected encounter that takes a young woman from the peak of privilege to the harsh reality of public shame. When a wealthy and entitled driver crosses paths with a truck driver who's had enough, the consequences will change her life forever. Stick around to find out how a single moment of arrogance can lead to a lesson in humility that no one will ever forget. Subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. It was just another day on the road for Jake Mitchell. As a long-haul truck driver, he had seen it all: the endless highways, the sleepless nights, and the occasional rude or careless drivers. But nothing could have prepared him for the encounter that would change everything. Jake had been rushing all morning. He had overslept, and if he didn't make it to his destination on time, he'd miss an important delivery. The weight of the clock was pressing down on him. As he steered his truck down a busy city street, he couldn't help but feel the familiar anxiety building. He had no time to waste. But then, the universe had other plans. Jake's truck was a powerful beast. But in the midst of the narrow, congested streets, there was a luxury sedan that seemed to be sitting there just to mock him. The car was parked right in front of a delivery dock, blocking his path. It wasn't just a casual inconvenience, this was an illegal parking job that had trapped him in a tight spot. Jake leaned on the horn, his frustration bubbling to the surface. No response. He honked again, harder this time, hoping to draw the driver's attention. Still, no movement. It was a quiet, sunny afternoon, and the city around him buzzed with the normal hustle and bustle. But his patience was quickly draining. The clock was ticking, and now there was a car in front of him that refused to move. He honked again, this time with purpose. Through the tinted windows, Jake caught a glimpse of movement. Finally, he thought. But when the window rolled down, he wasn't prepared for what came next. A young woman, no older than 25, glared at him with disdain. Her face was twisted in annoyance. And before he could even say a word, she raised her middle finger at him. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with such venom that it stopped him in his tracks. Jake felt the heat of anger rise within him, but he held his ground. He leaned out of his truck, his voice booming as he called out, "Hey, you can't park here, move your car." The woman, unfazed, snapped back at him, "Mind your own business. I'll park wherever I damn well please." Jake's jaw tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a case of someone being careless. This was entitlement on a level he hadn't encountered before. The woman, her arms crossed now, looked at him as if he were beneath her, some lowly worker who had no right to speak. "I don't have time for this," she said, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. "Do you have any idea who my father is? He could have your job and ruin your whole career." Jake couldn't believe it. He had seen this kind of behavior in movies. The entitled rich kid who thought the world revolved around them. But he had never faced it head-on. He was taken aback for a moment, not sure how to respond. Her words echoed in his mind. "Do you have any idea who my father is?" The arrogance in her voice was palpable. But Jake had had enough. "You can't just block the road like this. Move your car, or I'm calling the cops." Finally, with a roll of her eyes, the woman begrudgingly began to move her car. But as she pulled away, she threw one last insult his way, shouting as her car sped off, "Idiot." Jake sat there, stunned, watching her disappear from view. She had been rude, dismissive, and arrogant, but the worst part? She had left without the slightest acknowledgement of the inconvenience she had caused. As he sat in the truck, his hands gripping the wheel, Jake couldn't help but seethe. He had been in the right, yet it felt as though she had somehow won. But then, something inside him clicked. The injustice of it all. The sheer arrogance. He wasn't going to let it slide. He wasn't going to let her think she could just get away with treating people like that. Like they were beneath her. He had memorized her license plate number before she drove away. And he knew he wouldn't be able to just let it go. "I'm not done with this," he muttered under his breath, determination setting in. Later that evening, after he had finished his delivery, Jake sat in his hotel room, his laptop open in front of him. He quickly searched for the license plate number he had memorized. To his surprise, It was registered locally. He had a hunch about where she might live. His fingers danced across the keyboard as he dug deeper, finding her social media accounts. Jake felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anger as he scrolled through her posts. The girl, Jessica Taylor, was every bit as privileged as he had imagined. Pictures of expensive vacations, designer clothes, and fancy cars filled her feed. She seemed to revel in her wealth and status. Each post a reminder of how far removed she was from the real world. And then, he saw it, a selfie of Jessica with her new car. In the background, Jake's truck could be seen. The caption? "The truck driver behind me was honking like crazy. It's a free country. Idiot. Maybe I'll ask Daddy to buy his company." Jake's heart boiled over. She had turned the whole thing into a joke, mocking him and his job. As if his life didn't matter. He had to do something. This wouldn't end with her getting away with it. He leaned back in his chair, the gears in his mind turning. This wasn't just about a bad encounter anymore. It was about teaching this woman a lesson she would never forget. Something told him that if there were no consequences for people like Jessica, she would never change. The plan had already begun to take shape. Jake's mind didn't rest as he sat in the hotel room, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. His pulse quickened as the more he dug into Jessica Taylor's life, the more the weight of her arrogance settled on his chest. She wasn't just an inconsiderate driver. She was someone who thought she could trample over others without consequences, simply because she had money and influence. Jake's hands clenched into fists as he scrolled through her social media feed. Each post seemed to confirm his growing anger. There was the photo of her in a chic cafe, sipping an overpriced latte, a caption about how hard life was. And there, a picture of her in front of a sleek new sports car with a proud smile. In the background, his truck, the one she had mocked earlier in the day. A fire burned in Jake's chest. He knew he was just a truck driver to her, a nameless figure, someone who existed only to serve her. But now, he had a plan to turn the tables, to show Jessica the kind of person she really was. He wasn't just going to let this go. Not now. Not when she had taken something so small and turned it into a moment of humiliation for him. And she had done it without even knowing who he was. But Jake wasn't a man to stand by quietly. After a few hours of online searching, Jake found her address. It wasn't far from where he was staying. A quiet, affluent neighborhood that screamed privilege. He took down the address and, feeling a strange mixture of anger and anticipation, closed his laptop. The next day, he would take action. But for that night, he could barely sleep. His mind kept racing, going over every detail of his plan. He would need to be careful, meticulous. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. This was about teaching Jessica a lesson that would stay with her. Jake knew that people like her never learned anything until they were forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The next morning, Jake rose early, his mind still focused. He had a long drive ahead of him. But it was the only way to execute the next part of his plan. After finishing his delivery, he found a quiet parking spot and made a few calls. Through a contact he had in law enforcement, Jake was able to confirm the details he had found about Jessica. He was determined to make sure he had all the facts right before he moved forward. By evening, Jake was back in the area. He drove toward the neighborhood, the soft hum of his truck's engine calming his nerves. He parked a few blocks away and walked under the cover of darkness. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with houses that seemed to ooze wealth and comfort. The lawn of Jessica's house was pristine, the driveway big enough to fit 3 cars. And Jake felt a pang of bitterness. With a flashlight in hand, he approached the mailbox. There it was, the family name, Taylor. He jotted it down quickly before heading back to his truck. He had what he needed. Back at his hotel, Jake wasted no time. He turned on his laptop again and started digging deeper into Jessica's life. What he found was everything he had expected. She posted photos constantly, her new clothes, exotic trips, and endless photos of her with her friends at exclusive clubs. It was as if the world was her oyster, and she didn't have a care in the world. But one post, in particular, caught his attention. It was a picture of her in front of her new car, with Jake's truck visible in the background. The caption was what really made Jake's blood boil. The truck driver behind me was honking like crazy. It's a free country. Idiot. Maybe I'll ask Daddy to buy his company. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't just her mocking him. It was her mocking the very thing he did for a living. To her, a truck driver was nothing more than a mere inconvenience. Something to be dismissed with a laugh. Jake took a deep breath. He knew what he had to do. He didn't want to just get her back. He wanted to make sure this moment stuck with her. That it would be a turning point. He stayed up late into the night, formulating the next steps of his plan. It was risky, but if it worked, it would hit her where it mattered most, her reputation. By the time the sun came up, Jake was ready. He knew it would be a long day ahead. But he was determined. He had found the right angle, the right strategy to make sure that Jessica understood the consequences of her entitlement. He was tired of seeing people like her get away with treating others like dirt. And so, Jake set his plan into motion. He knew he couldn't stick around and watch it all unfold. The anticipation was enough to drive him crazy. He needed to be elsewhere, away from the fallout. But what he didn't realize was just how quickly everything would spiral out of control for Jessica. As he drove away, a strange feeling of satisfaction washed over him. He had done something that, in the end, was going to show her what happens when people like her refuse to understand their place in the world. The lesson was about to begin. The storm had been brewing. And it didn't take long for Jessica to realize the magnitude of the mistake she had made. When she woke up that morning, she had no idea her life was about to take a dramatic turn. Her phone buzzed incessantly, and at first, she thought it was a wave of new followers or likes. But as she checked her notifications, her heart sank. What she had thought would make her a star had instead turned her into a viral disgrace. Her mocking post about the truck driver had gone viral, but not for the reasons she imagined. The internet had erupted in anger. People from all walks of life, truck drivers, workers, and everyday folks, had rallied behind Jake, calling out her arrogance and entitlement. She had become the villain in her own story. Her social media was flooded with messages of hate and disgust, mocking her privilege and calling her out for her blatant disrespect. It was no longer just a single video, it was everywhere. Her followers, once loyal, turned on her, friends unfollowed her, strangers sent her harsh messages. And within hours, her carefully curated image of wealth and privilege was reduced to rubble. The weight of her actions came crashing down. And with it, the crushing realization that her reputation, the thing she had worked so hard to build, had been completely destroyed. For the first time in her life, Jessica saw what it was like to be on the receiving end of scorn. She wasn't a princess in a glass tower anymore, she was just another person. Exposed and vulnerable. The lesson was harsh, but it was a necessary one. She would never forget this moment. And maybe, just maybe, it would change her for the better. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories.